So once again, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for our uh, fall winter uh, lecture series on the Shoshinge. And I know we're going at a snail's pace, but it's important, I think, that you um, grasp what we're talking about. And there's actually so much depth, I think, in the written words of the Shoshinge. So tonight's talk is no exception. It probably will be very slow, but that's okay. Um, and before I go any further, I'll let you know that there is not going to be a lecture next week. I have to go to Victoria on Monday. It's actually quite interesting. There's a prior to the pandemic, there was an organization that helped organize. They called it the BC Buddhist Festival once a year in May. It's basically the same as the Vesak celebration, but it was the largest gathering of Buddhists in, uh, I believe, BC. And we would hold this once a year. And it was spearheaded by a Tibetan monastery in Vancouver. But one of the projects that they were working on was to try to get the provincial government to recognize a BC Buddhist Cultural Day. And so they petitioned the government for the first Sunday in May to be formally recognized as Buddhist Cultural Day. So now this year they are starting the festival again. Plus, they decided, or I guess they made arrangements to go this coming Monday to Victoria to actually join in the legislative assembly, and then at the end of that, meet with some of the MLAs to try to further this cause. And they asked myself if I could join them. So I'm going to be going to Victoria Monday for this. And because of that, I just don't have the time to prepare for the Tuesday. I'll probably be in Victoria all day Monday as it is. So hence there will not be a class next Tuesday. I'll tell you all about my trip when I get back on following Tuesday, though. So I just wanted to let you know that. But anyways, so we are continuing on with the Shoshinge, and I am grateful to all of you for continuing to join this journey of looking into the Shoshinge. It is, of course, one of the most important pieces written by Shinran Shonin, the founder of Jodo Shinshu, and it encapsulates the whole teaching of Jodo Shinshu in a very concise verse, if you will. And we had started getting right into the verse, and now I'm just going to continue on from where we left off last week. And last week I ended up talking about the 18th, 17th, and the 11th vow, and how they all sort of come together as one through this fulfillment of the 48 vows. Not only basically the fulfillment of the 48 vows, or Amida Buddha, becoming Amida Buddha, has paved the way for ignorant beings or sentient beings to to ultimately attain enlightenment. But what Shinran found was that through those vows, it gave us a way to receive the teachings in this life and then attain the enlightenment as we pass away. And so he mentions in the last part, I talked about the 17th, 18th, and 11th vow, and that'll come up again today. But following the mention of those three particular vows, then Shinran continued on by saying, the sole purpose for Shakyamuni appearing in this world was solely to teach the primal vow of Amida Buddha. And then he says that we, an ocean of beings in an evil age of 5 defilements, should entrust ourselves to Tathagata's words of truth. So traditionally, these, in order to understand this, you obviously have to know what the 5 defilements or the age of 5 defilements is. And so the traditional understanding of these, I took this out of the collected works of Shinran, the second book of the collected works of Shinran, where it breaks down commentaries and it talks about the actual work. I don't have it right here on me, but I showed it to you before. The collected works of Shinran is the collection of various writings of Shinran Shonin. And it's collected works of Shinran is broken down into 2 halves. The first half is the writings, and then the second book is the commentaries or how to read those particular writings. And so this comes from the glossary in the second book, and it talks about how to understand the passage. And I'm just going to bring that up on the screen, share it with you all. Okay, so you can all, I hope you can all see that now. Okay. So the first 2 lines here are carryover from the last time. As I mentioned, that Shakyamuni Tathagata appeared in this world solely to teach the ocean-like primal vow of Amida. Then Shinran goes on to say, we, an ocean of beings in an evil age of 5 defilements, should entrust ourselves to the Tathagata's words of truth. And so this is where we have to find out what the age of 5 defilements is. And the 5 defilements are signs. Well, traditionally, the scholars would say that they represent what we call the last Dharma age or the declining Dharma age, Makpo. And we went over this at the very beginning of the lectures last fall about the various time periods. The right Dharma age is the first 500 years after the Buddha passed away. And then for the next 1,000 years, they call it the semblance Dharma age. And then for the next 10,000 years, they're called Mappo, or the last or declining Dharma age. And so the 5 defilements traditionally have been used as a way to, one way of defining this Mappo, that these signs occur or these events occur that defines Mappo. And they are the defiled age, when war, pestilence, famine, natural calamities, and pollution abound. Obviously, that does fit our present world right now. Defiled views characterized by confrontation of ideologies, confusion of values, and prevalence of nihilistic attitudes. So again, we can see confrontation ideologies are very prevalent in our world. This prevalence of nihilistic attitudes, what it basically means is that there's no feeling of worrying about outcomes of things. So you live your life basically doing whatever you want because you don't realize the effects of or the truth of cause and effect, and therefore you live without any responsibilities. And again, we see that in our present life quite prominently. Defiled passion, the flourishing of greed, anger, ignorance, and evil ways. I don't have to talk about that. I think it's pretty easy to understand that one. And then defiled beings, an increase in human life of inferior quality, dull minds, weak bodies, and egotism. Well, with I must admit that I can be a pretty good couch potato myself, but in doing so, it probably does dull the mind. We can see how, although our longevity of life may have increased, I don't know if you can say the same for spiritual quality of our lives. And so that is actually both this one and the last one, defiled life, the wasting and shortening of human life, right? And you would think that in this day and age, we're getting advanced, and modern medicine has allowed us to live very long lives. But again, it's this wasting and shortening of the quality of human life, perhaps, is what is mentioned here. And then it goes on to say that these 5 defilements are actually interrelated. The defilement of age is caused by defiled views, which arise from the defiled passion that controls the lives of defiled beings who manifest defiled life. So traditionally, when we talk about these 5 defilements, as I mentioned, it has been used to express this era called Mapo. However, when you actually look at the text where this 5 defilements comes from, one of the sources is from the Amida Sutra that we chant regularly, or we used to chant regularly during our Shotsuki services. But in there, it actually, near the end of the Amida Sutra, it lists the 5 defilements. And the translation of that is written here. It says, Shariputra, just as I now praise the inconceivable virtue of other Buddhas, they also praise my inconceivable virtue, saying, Shakyamuni Buddha, you have accomplished an extremely difficult and unprecedented task. In this Saha world, during the evil period of the 5 defilements, those of time, views, passions, sentient beings, and lifespan, you have attained the highest perfect enlightenment, and for the sake of sentient beings, have delivered this teaching, which is the most difficult in the world to accept in faith. So this is Shakyamuni Buddha talking to his disciple Shariputra, okay? And he's saying, just as I praise the other Buddhas, they're actually praising me as well for what I have accomplished or attained. And the way they praise them is saying, you attained enlightenment, despite the fact you're in this Saha world of suffering, delusion, and during the evil period of the 5 defilements, right? And then Shakyamuni Buddha continues on and says, Shariputra, you must realize that I have accomplished this difficult task during the period of the 5 defilements. That is to say, having attained the highest perfect enlightenment, I have, for the sake of all the world, delivered this teaching, which is so hard for them to accept. This is indeed an extremely difficult task, not and, but an extremely difficult task. So what we can gather from this passage, and I must thank you all for allowing me to study more, because up until this lecture, I had basically accepted the teachings from my teachers, the scholars, etc. And they all basically mentioned these 5 defilements as defining the last Dharma age. However, there's one problem with that, because Shakyamuni Buddha just says right here that I have attained enlightenment during this period of 5 defilements, which means Shakyamuni Buddha actually believed that his time was also a time of 5 defilements. So it's not just restricted to the last or the declining Dharma age. In fact, these 5 defilements define humanity. So it didn't just start because of the declining Dharma age. And when we go back and look at them again, right? Defiled age, a kalpa, when war, pestilence, famine, natural calamities, and pollution abound. Well, you know, Shakyamuni Buddha, during his period, was the prince of the kingdom, Kapilavastu. And it's recorded that there were wars going on constantly between different kingdoms to either increase their area or to protect their area. But war is nothing that has just started recently. It's been going on for centuries and centuries, since the beginning of man. Pestilence, famine, natural calamities, again, these things all have been going on, since the age of dinosaurs. What is it? The meteor, the theory is that the meteor hit the earth that caused the extinction of dinosaurs. Well, that's a natural calamity. So all these things have happened. Defiled views, the confrontation of ideologies, confusion of values, and the prevalence of nihilistic attitudes. Well, when we think about what happened when the historical Buddha was born, after he was born, there was that prophecy by the prophet Ashita, who said, if should this child encounter suffering, he will abandon the kingdom and go in search of the truth. Well, so to prevent this, the king tried to shelter the life of Siddhartha, the prince. And so when you think of the confusion of values, anything unsightly would be hidden away from him. So there was obviously defiled views there. So that existed. Defiled passions, the flourishing of greed, anger, and ignorance. Of course, this, again, as long as there have been humans, I'm sure there has been greed, anger, and ignorance. And defiled beings and defiled life. I'm sure you could find arguments for these. In fact, I'm sure in the poverty-ridden countries that many of these things existed even greater than perhaps over here. I know when I went in the year 2000, we went on a pilgrimage to India, and India is a fascinating country if you've ever had an opportunity to go to. It is one of those countries where you can't leave India without an opinion. You either really like it and want to go back again, or you will never go back again. And some of the things that we saw were very difficult to see. Polio was still quite prevalent there, and you had beggars in the train stations that were basically walking on their hands because they were all deformed from various illness. So, the weak bodies, etc. That exists today, but I'm sure it existed during the time of the Buddha as well. So all these things are not just something that define the last Dharma age, But in fact, as we see from this passage from the Amida Sutra, Shakyamuni clearly states that it existed during his time too. So when Shinran says in this Shoshinge, the passage, when he says, we, an ocean of beings in an evil age of 5 defilements, Shinran is actually referring not only to the last Dharma age, but to all periods. So when we started, or just before we started the actual passages into the Shoshinge, I also introduced the introduction to the Shoshinge. There was the preface to the Shoshinge. And in that preface, it does say that, the Nembutsu teachings or the teachings of Amida Buddha are for all beings, not just the last Dharma age, but also during the period of the Buddha. And this, when Shinran refers to we, an ocean of beings in an evil age of 5 defilements, he's talking about the fact that this teaching is for all beings throughout all ages, past, present, as well as future. And we must ultimately entrust ourselves to the Tathagata's words of truth. Now, what's interesting here, this Tathagata's words of truth is referencing actually Amida Buddha's wish. And Shinran Shonin, he does a, let me just pull up. Oh, where did I do that? So in the record of lament, record in Lament of Divergence, this was written by, here we go. So the Tanisho, we call it, and it was written by Shinran's disciple, Yuyenbo, but we look at it as the actual words of Shinran Shonin. In there, Shinran says, in the chapter 2 of this Tanisho, near the end of that chapter, Shinran, to sort of clarify that his words cannot be empty, he says, if Amida's primal vow is true, Shakyamuni's teaching cannot be false. If the Buddha's teaching is true, Chantal's commentaries cannot be false. If Chantal's commentaries are true, can Honin's words be lies? If Honin's words are true, then surely what I say cannot be empty. Okay, so here he starts off by saying, if Amida's primal vow is true, Shakyamuni's teachings cannot be false. And what's interesting about this is that normally we would probably say, if Shakyamuni Buddha's words are true, then Amida's primal vow must be true, right? We would say, we would listen to what Shakyamuni Buddha had said. And if Shakyamuni Buddha's teachings are true, then of course the primal vow must be true. But Shinran actually goes the opposite, and he says, if the primal vow is true, then Shakyamuni's words can't be empty. So he's saying before the words of Shakyamuni ever existed was a primal vow of Amida Buddha. And so when Shinran is saying should entrust ourselves to Tathagata's words of truth, he's talking about both Shakyamuni, but more so the words of Amida Buddha, or the vows of Amida Buddha. So, and again, Shinran is stating that this is for beings of all times and all places. To all sentient beings in the world of suffering, regardless of time and place. Okay. So going on then, now this next section is also so laden with symbolism and have to be explained. So in English, when you translate Japanese text into English. The part of the problem with translation is that the characters, you have to translate it with only one nuance. So, for instance, in this first line, it says no hotsu ichi nen ki ai shin. Okay, and that's translated in English is when the one thought moment of joy arises. Okay? This ichi nen here, it's translated as one thought moment. Okay, one thought moment, ichi nen. Now, when it's translated as such, and this is actually quite a unique translation, because normally how this ichinen is translated, and I've got it down here. Well, this is Shinan's interpretation, but did I put it at the end? Can't remember if I did or not. Maybe not. Okay. Normally, when we talk about ichinen or prior to Shinran Shonin, usually the understanding. Here we go. The understanding ichinen. So in this passage, as you see the English translation, one thought moment is quite unique because to Shinran's predecessors, the seven patriarchs, when they talk about ichinen, it usually means one recitation of the name of the Buddha. Okay, one recitation versus a measurement of time. Okay? Where Shinran uses this as a measurement of time. And so when we talk about time in Buddhism, you have two extremes. And the one is what we call kalpa in Sanskrit, or ko in Japanese. And this is to denote a very, very, very long period, right? And I've explained before, there are different ways of measuring this. And they are the two that are most famous are what we call the heavenly being measurement and the tiny bird measurement. And in both cases, so with the heavenly being measurement, it said that you had a rock that was 14 kilometers by 14 kilometers by 14 kilometers. And every once in 3 years, a heavenly being comes down from the heavens and flies over that rock and gently sweeps the sleeve over that rock. And the friction that is created from that sleeve going over the rock erodes the rock, very, very slightly. But the number of years that it will take for the rock to completely disappear through the erosion with the sleeve is considered one kalpa, right? And the other, the small bird, tiny bird measurement is if you had a room of the same size, 14 kilometers by 14 kilometers by 14 kilometers, and it was filled with poppy seeds, and once in every 3 years, bird would come down and take one poppy seed out. The amount of years it takes to empty that storage room is one kalpa, right? So that's a very, very, very long period of time. And on the other extreme, there is what they call sana in Sanskrit, or setsuna in Japanese. And this Shinran Shoni in this case translated it as ichinen, which is one moment or one thought moment. And it is, according to the Buddhist measurement of time, it is the smallest measurement of time. It is understood as an instantaneous moment. It is a time when awakening happens. Okay, and so at that instant, at that moment, this is when the finite. So usually, when we talk about time, we're talking about things that are ongoing. Time usually, continues on. We can't stop time, etc., etc. However, at this shortest amount of time, this ichinen, at that one thought moment, the infinite and the finite can come together at one. So it's that moment of awakening to Amida's compassion. It's the moment of understanding or receiving shinjin, or what we call shinjin faith, entrusting heart. It's that moment, that aha moment, when we, I guess, have that awakening, and so that's what Shinan says in this one, when the one thought moment of joy arises. Now, where this comes from, this one thought moment of joy, it actually comes from the larger sutra. The larger sutra on Amida that we have been referring to, that Shinran has taken this part of the Shoshinge from, is broken into two halves. The first half includes the 48 vows, how Dharmakara becomes Amida Buddha. And then the second half begins with what we call the completion statement. And the completion statement, in particular, it refers to the completion statement of what we call the 11th, 17th, and 18th vow. And when you read part 2 of this larger sutra on Amida, it goes as this, it reads as such. The Buddha said to Ananda, the sentient beings born in that land all dwell among the truly settled, for in that Buddha land there is not even one who is falsely settled or not settled. This, of course, is referencing the 11th vow. The Buddha Tathagatas throughout the 10 quarters, countless as the sands of the Ganges, are one in praising the majestic power of the virtues, inconceivably profound, or the Buddha of immeasurable life. This is the 17th vow. And then he says, when sentient beings, upon hearing the Buddha's name, realize an entrusting heart in joy, with even a single thought of the Buddha, direct their merits with sincere mind, and aspire to be born in that land, they then all attain birth in that land and dwell in the stage of non-retrogression. So this part here is the completion statement of the 18th vow. So in order to understand this better, there is another piece of work that I am introducing, and that is this one here, called Notes on Once Calling and Many Calling. Okay, so what this is notes that Shinran Shonin wrote, and it is based on a commentary, or based on a document that was written by a person by the name of Liu Kang. Now, Liu Kang was one of Honen Shonin's disciples. So Shinran Shonin is a disciple of Honen Shonin. Honen had many disciples, so Shinran wasn't the only one. So there were some that were older than Shinran, so he sort of looked up to them. And one of the individuals he looked up to was this Liu Kang. And Liu Kang wrote a passage on what we call the clarification of once calling and many calling. Now, what this is all about is that when Honen taught the Pure Land teachings, there came two different thoughts on the recitation of the name of the Buddha. The one is that, as Shinran has mentioned, it is through the power of Amida, the what we call the other power, that we are allowed to be born into the Pure Land. And therefore, what for Shinran was paramount of importance was awakening to the heart of the Buddha, and then having the entrusting heart, or what we call Shinjin. Okay? So under this way of thinking, Shinran felt, okay, even one recitation of Nembutsu, Namo Amida Butsu, is enough to be born in the Pure Land if it's done, if it's recited with a sincere heart, or if it's recited out of this entrusting heart. Okay, so for Shinran, this one's calling was um, the perspective that he took. But there were others who felt, well, if reciting the Nembutsu once is good, then surely reciting it more often will be that much more beneficial. So they felt the more you recited the Nembutsu, the better it is. It makes sense, right? If reciting it once is good, then it surely must be better to recite it more. Okay, so there was an argument that started, and there were those who felt that through reciting it more, um, what you're doing is you're cultivating your understanding of the teaching, so that when the time comes for you to pass on, you will have a very peaceful or a majestic passing on. The more you recite the Nembutsu, right? So that was the side of the many callings. So there was this great debate that was going on amongst the followers of Honen and amongst his disciples. Honen himself said, though it's true that our birth is determined with the single recitation, he says, as a practice, you should recite it throughout your life. So he sort of took both sides, basically, right? He says, yes, the one calling is the way for us to enter or be in that state of non-retrogression. However, he said, as a practice, one should continue reciting as much as possible throughout one's life. There is also, so we call it the practice of gratitude. So we recite the Nembutsu out of gratitude, not as a goal-oriented practice, but it's a practice of gratitude, appreciation. And that would be more in line with how Shinran would understand it. But so this Ryukan wrote this piece called The Clarification of One's Calling and Many Calling. And Shinran made sort of a note on that. He actually told his followers, Shinran said that this is one of the works you should read, is this Clarification of One's Calling and Many Calling by Ryukan. And he really looked up highly to Ryukan. So in this notes that Shinran writes, he writes the following. He says, in the largest sutra of the Buddha of Immeasurable Life, it is taught, all sentient beings, as they hear the name, realize even one thought moment of shinjin and joy, which is directed to them from Amida's sincere mind, and aspiring to be born in that land, they then attain birth and dwell in the stage of non-retrogression. So again, here in this passage, Shinran talks about the one thought moment of shinjin and joy. And he continues on after he quotes this completions passage from the larger sutra. Shinran then in his notes breaks down word for word what was said there. So he says, all sentient beings. This means all the sentient beings throughout the 10 quarters. Right? So it starts off, all sentient beings. And then hear the name. So as they hear the name, is to hear the name that embodies the primal vow. Hear means to hear the primal vow and be free of doubt. Further, it indicates shinjin. So in Shinran's understanding, to hear was not just listening through your ears, but to hear is when you're truly receiving the teachings, and therefore there's no more doubt. So hearing in this case is means without doubt. And that also indicates the person who has Shinjin. Realize even one thought moment of Shinji and joy. Shinji is hearing the vow of the Tathagata being free of doubt. Okay, he repeats that again. And then this joy, kangi in Japanese, he breaks it down into the two parts. He says, kang is the gladdening of the body, and gi is the gladdening of the heart. So it's both with body and heart. So your whole being rejoices at hearing the name of the Buddha. Even, so in here is the word even one thought moment. And in this case, even includes all possibilities. So even one thought moment means it doesn't exclude it from others. That even one thought moment, just that one awakening is good enough. But it means that also it could also encompass many other possibilities. Okay, and then he says one thought moment, and again here he clarifies that when he's talking about ichinen here in this passage, it is not one recitation of the name, but it is at its ultimate time, at its ultimate limit, where the realization of Shinjin takes place. And the sincere mind that is talked about in this passage is the mind which is true, real, and sincere, the heart of Amida Tathagata. So the sincere mind is not something we cultivate. It is the mind of Amida Buddha. And we receive that mind through the awakening of Shinji, if you will. And then he continues on, directed to them is Amida's giving the name that embodies the primal vow to sentient beings throughout the 10 quarters. Aspiring to be born in that land. Aspiring to be born means that every sentient being should desire to be born in that land, fulfilled through the primal vow. That land is a land of happiness. They then attain birth, then means immediately, without any time elapsing, without a day passing. Soku also means to ascend and become established in a certain rank. Attain means to have attained what one shall attain. When one realizes true and real Shinjin, one is immediately grasped and held within the heart of the Buddha of unhindered light, never to be abandoned. So here, where is that? So this there's a passage here that says Soku Toku Ojo, which is they attain immediately birth and dwell in the stage of what we call non-retrogression. And this is when we receive this interesting mind or heart, we are in the grasp of the Buddha, and the grasp of the Buddha in Japanese, they use this character called sesshu, and it's broken down into two parts. Setsu is to receive, and hold shu. So Amida grasps us and doesn't abandon us. Okay, so we are within the grasp of the Buddha or the Dharma. And then on this same notes, Shinan then continues on and says, further, Bodhisattva Dharmaka established about necessary attainment of nirvana, which is taught in the largest sutra. So this is going back to that 11th vow that I talked about last week. If when I attain Buddhahood, the human beings and devas in my land do not dwell among the settled, there are also necessarily attaining birth, nirvana, may not attain perfect enlightenment. And how Shinran understands this, though, is that he brings us down to when the moment that we receive Shinjin or awaken to Shinjin is in fact the same as the beings in the land who will necessarily attain in the nirvana. Okay, so it continues on further down here. In these words of the two honored ones, we find stated the significance of they then attain birth. That is, to become established in the stage of truly settled. Thus, is itself to dwell in the stage of non-retrogression. When a person becomes established in this stage, he or she becomes one who will necessarily attain the supreme great nirvana. Hence, it is taught that one realizes the equal of perfect enlightenment or avaiva avarivartika, avinivartaniya. I'm sorry, my pronunciation. These words are not that common to me. So it also said one immediately enters the stage of the definitely settled. So then Shinan writes, the true and real Shinji explained above is a diamond-like mind of the crosswise leap realized through other power. Hence, the larger sutra teaches that the person of the Nembutsu is of the stage next to enlightenment, like Maitreya. Maitreya is a bodhisattva of the diamond-like mind of lengthwise progression. Lengthwise applies to people who follow the path of sages, the path of difficult practices performed through self-power. Crosswise means laterally or transcendently. Leap means to go beyond. When we have boarded the ship of the Buddha's karmic power, which has been fulfilled through the great vow, we go laterally and transcendently beyond the vast ocean of birth and death and reach the shore of true fulfilled land. So some of you may have remembered, or I hope you remembered, in past talks, I gave that reference to the bug that's trying to get out in a bamboo tree. And one way that they can do is go vertically, and they can, the most difficult is for them to gnaw through holes, each node on the bamboo tree. As the bug climbs vertically, it has to bite through a node and create a hole to get to the next section, and so forth, so forth. This is that in here, lengthwise. Okay, so people who follow the path of sages, so the monks and nuns who go through the very difficult practices, they're basically like this bug that's climbing vertically, trying to get out through its efforts or will. I also explained that there's another way for the bug to get out. Well, there's several other ways. One is that it climbs vertically, but there are holes within the node. So the bug sees the hole and goes through the hole, so it doesn't have to chew through each node. But it's still going vertically. And then there's the other bug that sees the hole in the side of the bamboo and just goes out through that hole in the side, so they don't have to go vertically. And this is what we talk about crosswise, right? So when we receive, so basically Shinran is saying is that instant, that moment that we receive the joy of receiving the workings of Amida Buddha, in that instant, we go out sideways. So we transcend sideways, not going vertically. And so this is what Shinran is referring to here, is that when we receive the great vow, we all immediately go out sideways, not because of who we are, but because of the working of Amida Buddha. So the stage next to enlightenment, like Maitreya, next means near, next in order. Near means that Maitreya is a person who will definitely attain supreme nirvana. Hence the pronouncement like Maitreya. The person who realizes Shinjin and Seizen Nembutsu is nearing supreme nirvana also. Next in order means that when what is this? 5,670,000,000 years have passed. Maitreya will definitely attain the level of perfect enlightenment, will become the next Buddha in this world after Shakyamuni. Like means that a person of Shinjin is also like Maitreya, in that, in fact, after this life, present life, will unfailingly attain the enlightenment of supreme nirvana. So this is from this notes on the one's calling and many callings, and when Shinan says, when the one thought moment of joy arises, nirvana is attained without severing blind passion. So even though we're still physically here, instantaneously we transcend crosswise. We go sideways as opposed to vertically, and that Shinan alludes to in that notes on one's calling versus many callings. And then he continues on by saying, when ignorant and wise, even great offenders and slanderers of the Dharma, all alike turn and enter Shinjin. They are like waters that on entering the ocean become one in taste with it. This is a very deep metaphor that Shinan uses, because when rivers into the ocean, it is not because of the doing of the rivers that they become one in taste. It is because the doing of the ocean that they become the salt water, right? It's not the rivers that make them salt water. It's the doing of the ocean that makes such. And similarly, what Shinan is saying is when all beings awaken to the mind of Amida, through the working of Amida, we all become one in taste. We all become the same, basically. So there is no discrimination of wise or ignorant or grave offenders and slanders of the Dharma. They all become one, not because of who we are, but because of the working of Amida Buddha. So these four passages are alluding to this, and Shinan continues on with some beautiful metaphors that I will continue on, not next week, but the week following. What I'm thinking of doing is trying to get to the point before the seven patriarchs, and then I think we'll take a little break. And then we'll start off again, perhaps in the fall. I would start off with the seven patriarchs, because I'm getting quite tired, actually, of these lectures every week. They do actually take quite a bit of my time. So and not that I don't like it, but I do need to take I think you need to take a break from listening to me all the week in, week out too. I'm sure it's not easy. And so we'll continue on to the point where we get to the seven patriarchs, and then we'll take a little break. So I wanted to finish off there today. And I'm going to just stop. Okay. So does anybody have any? I know it's an unfair question when I say, does anybody have any questions, and throw it out there to you, but does anybody have any questions?
I've got a question, Sensei.
Yes.
What I was wondering, when you were mentioning the meeting of the finite and the infinite, relating to the one thought moment of joy, is the term Kiho Itai came to my mind. Is there any relationship? Is there any relationship?
Yes, exactly. So Kiho Itai means Ki is the vesicle, that's us, sentient beings. Ho is the Dharma. And Itai is when they come together. So Namo Amida Butsu is actually when the Dharma and us come together. Okay. Amida is the Dharma and Namo is the sentient being. So it's this. That's exactly it. That moment of awakening or realization. It doesn't mean you've suddenly become enlightened, but you become aware of something greater, and that is at this one thought moment. It's the briefest of moment. It's basically when one realizes it's like, you know, the difference between sleeping and being awake. When do you know that you're awake? You just know you're awake, right? Yeah, and so it's similar. There's an instant or a moment, and it's the shortest. It's in the Buddhist way of understanding time. It's that moment when the infinite and the finite come together, and it's also so um, the Mahayana term that's often used is sunyata. Sunyata is often referred to as emptiness, but emptiness does not mean zero. In fact, emptiness is that moment when um, the self and the infinite become one. So, quoting another famous Buddhist master, Dogen, who was from the Zen school, he said to sit zazen, to sit, to meditate, is to see the self, and to see the self is to lose the self, and to lose the self is be affirmed by all the dharmas. So what he means there is that when we sit and meditate, we're introspecting or seeing ourselves. The more we see ourselves, the more we realize there is no such self, and at that moment, you become one with the Dharma, if you will. So it's the same thing coming from a different school, different way of expressing it, but it's very much the same thing. So Shinran, this one thought moment was, and for him, so what I forgot to mention or show you, and I should go back there. I should go back there. Oh, let me pull that up. Hang on a second. Just gonna pull up those notes again. Okay, I'm gonna. What did I do with that? Okay, so I'm gonna just share with you the notes again, because in the very end, I forgot to mention a very important thing. So in this notes on the once calling and many callings, so even though Yukon, when he wrote this, he's talking about the recitation of the name, right? Once calling versus many callings. But in fact, Shinran has a completely different interpretation. And that when he talks about the completion passage of the 18th vow in the largest sutra, and he says, all sentient beings, as they hear the name, realize even one thought moment of shinji and joy, which is directed to them from Amida's sincere mind. Okay, so this way of interpreting it, and I've got it right at the end here. And I'm just going to skip a lot of this stuff. Oh, right here, footnotes. Okay. The traditional way of reading this completion passage of the 18th vow reads like this: when sentient beings hear the name, say it even once in trust and joy. So here it's definitely talking about Ichinen as reciting the name once. Okay, that's the traditional way of interpreting this, and it was done so prior to Shinran Shonin. When Shinran takes this, he says, sentient beings, as they hear the name, realize even one thought moment of shinji and joy, which is Amida's sincere mind giving itself to them. Okay, so he really takes a almost a quantum shift of understanding. He's saying it's not reciting a name once. It's much more instantaneous in that. It's that moment that we receive the entrusting heart. It's that moment we are awakened to that sincere mind of Amida, which is given to us by Amida, says, right? And then when we realize the joy and entrusting heart in that moment, that's what Shinan is saying about one thought moment. So again, he's changed the way of understanding, or he's read deeper into it than what was traditionally understood. So to say it even once was the traditional way, and Shina takes that as the receives the sincere mind. Okay, and then once we receive that, then we have the aspirations to be born in that land. So for Shinan, the ultimate became this receiving or entrusting mind, or what we call Shinjin. So that's why for Shinan, the cause of birth, he says, is this Shinjin, or that awakening that happens. That's even to the root of that one recitation of the name. You have to have that entrusting heart in order to be able to recite the name. So yeah, so that brevity, if you will, that instant is what Shina is referring to. I don't know.
Sensei.
You're welcome.
Reverend Grant,
Yes.
it's not so much a question, but when we put our hands together and we say Namu Amida Butsu, and most of us do several times a day, etc. And when we do that, we're hoping to, I'm not going to use the word achieve, but to I guess the word I would use is to entrust. And I think that's like, that's the difficulty that I see that one has, and certainly that I have, is giving. I'm trying to use the right words here, but to give up and to trust over your being or your heart, and having the, I don't know whether it's the word courage or to give yourself over, and is it, or like the one thought moment, or that it just takes that one, and then I guess that in some people it is just that one moment when everything tends to come together.
Well, yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying, and Shinan also, going back to the Tanisho, the notes lamenting the divergence, his disciple Yuyenbo comes out and says, even though I really admire your teachings, or I am your disciple, he says, I don't have any desire to be born in the Pure Land. I don't dance with joy for reciting the Nembutsu. And Shinan says clearly that is because of our defiled natures. Because we are basically bound to our egos. But he said it's precisely for such a being that the Buddha or Amida Buddha has said that your grasp never to be let go of. So Shinan said basically, if you were actually dancing with joy of going to the Pure Land, then you might actually have a misunderstanding of it, because it's that whole idea of, oh yeah, I got it. And when you say I got it, you don't have it.
Like your ego.
Okay. Yeah, it's your ego. Okay. So the fact that you have doubt or that you are reluctant to let go, Sheena says that's very natural, and not to worry about it. Uh, in fact, it's maybe a more of a sign of sincerity. Shinan has written in his latter years too that even though he, you know, teaches these teachings, that within himself, he says, there's no, uh, there is nothing pure within himself. So from a third party, we would look at him as, oh, this great teacher, this great master. But Shina said within himself, he doesn't see anything great about himself because of our egos or because of his ego. So, what you're saying, I understand perfectly well. But at the same time, I would say not to worry about it. Because the path itself is important. The journey itself is important. And so as we struggle along our way, slowly but surely we begin to appreciate things, the teachings. And for myself too, um, I really appreciate having this opportunity because it does allow me to reflect uh, on the teachings, and also I learn as I go along as well. So I thank all of you for providing me that opportunity.
Sensei, I'm sorry,
Yes.
I know Ted has spoken. Do you know, having these opportunities, to hear and to take it in, but I find, and just a personal level is, I have a lot of in my mind. I do a lot of reading of various things, and I get in my mind. But what I've been able to do, or I don't know, no, I haven't been able to do it yet, but I'm more observant of the fact that it's okay. That stuff is there, but that entrusting to let it go, and it's going to be, as I have a t-shirt that says, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And it's such a simple thing. And because I spent a lot of time in my head trying to understand things. And if I can just let it empty out, and just allow it to flow over me like water. And that, but it's that working so hard to achieve something, understanding, or just why am I here, or looking up in the night at the ceiling and wondering, gee, after, like tonight, I will be looking at the ceiling, thinking about what you've talked about with us and explained, and I will read this over again. And this is what I do. Shows you I'm a long way from where I might want to be. I tomorrow will be with a yellow highlighter going through all of this, trying to understand it a little bit more. And I get to a place when it's like, I don't get it. It's okay. It'll be okay. And so
Maybe
I don't know if it's not doubt. It's just, there's so much there, and I can understand why being on the mountain and learning, it's like, you know what, I'm going to leave the mountain behind. I'm coming down, and I'm going to just let it be, and not so much understand, but let it be. And I think I'll be 75 this year, and I think, wow, my 30,000 days are coming up quickly, but I think at the end of that time, and I'm going to be listening to Roland's lecture on MAID.
Oh, yes.
And the Buddhist perspective on that. And there's so much for us now to concentrate on, well, what is it all about? And I don't know. I said to Ted today, when that time comes, I'm not saying MAID, but whatever it is, whenever the end of my days, don't know, there we are. Gosh, I said, what if I don't see the Buddha? But I won't know that I didn't see him, and nobody else will know either. And so it's this thing of like, oh, trust it. Just, it's going to be okay. Follow what we're hearing. This is such an opportunity for me that's in my head, but at the same time, I really realize, get out of there, because you're just spoiling it, you know? So anyway, well, thank you everyone for listening to that little, as Sensei say, I digress, I go off.
I think it is important. I think what you mentioned, it's true, you know, so often we worry about something that we can't really do anything about.
Yeah.
You know, as you say, when the time comes, it comes, and whether we see the Buddha or we don't, I mean, there's nothing we're going to be doing about it, regardless. So, but you know, I think all these experiences, not just this talk, but you know, whatever we do in life, we're on a path, and every step is important on that path. You know, you were talking about MAID, and I was in, well, what was that? We were in the States, the Ministers Association, the Canadian ministers went down and joined the ministers from the States for their summer study session. And what was interesting, it was something that we don't have up here. It was just before, I think it was just before the elections. So as part of what they do in the States, they have the elections for the president, but they also have the state elections at the same time. And in those state elections, each state has certain referendums that are unique to that state. So in California, during that election, the referendum was on the death penalty. Whether and California has the death penalty, but there was people that were saying we should abolish it, and there were various arguments for it. The ones that were saying that they should abolish it, the argument was that it hasn't been proven that the penal system unfairly discriminates towards minorities. In that, in the death penalty, there's a disproportionate amount, mainly of colored individuals who get that. So there's this thought of discrimination. That was one argument against it. Another argument against it was that, and it was kind of a strange argument, but it's costing the state too much to have these inmates on the death row, because they're allowed to appeal it, I think 7 times or something. So by the time they appeal it 7 times, it could go up to like 30 something years, and the taxpayers have to pay for all those years on death row. So there was a financial aspect. But anyways, and of course there were those who were arguing for the death penalty in this referendum. And so the ministers, when we were in the study session, we were saying, trying to figure out, you know, as ministers, should there be a stance on this, right? And one of the ministers, one of the senior ministers, came up with a very unique understanding, which I don't know if it applies to MAID as well, but one of the things that he said, or the thing that he said that made everyone think, is that with the penal system, if you give the death penalty from a Buddhistic standpoint, you are taking the life of a sentient being who has the capacity of attaining enlightenment. So you are preventing that from happening in this life. And therefore, it was deemed to be something that from a Buddhistic perspective, we should not do. And so taking life is a very deep subject, and there is no right or wrong answer, I don't believe. With medical assisted death it's wrought with different points of views, but every step that we take in life has a meaning to it. So all these talks and lectures and all the other lectures that you attend, and they all have some meaning to it. Whether it's this lecture is a lousy lecture, that also is a meaning. There's never a bad meaning. There's always a meaning. Okay. Anyways, thank you. Are there any other questions or anybody else want to speak? Please do. If not, then thank you all for joining us, and I will see you again, not next week, as I mentioned, but the following week. Okay, so there's going to be a 1 week break. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sensei.